Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters, friends and viewers of Ikra TV. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk, the program that comes to your homes every week and every Tuesday at 6 o'clock, hopefully bringing you issues and items of interest to you that touches your people's lives on a day-to-day basis. Something around, family issues, health issues, educational issues, community issues, legal issues, etc. We have been doing all sorts of programs over the last nearly 2 years or so that I've been doing it, and I hope that what I'm bringing to you on a regular basis is something that touches you as a person and as a family, and it's something that actually brings awareness to you about some of the issues that confront our community individually as well as a collectively as a Muslim community as well. Now, over the months, as I say, we've been talking about several issues around COVID, around health, about education, about social issues as well. Today, I want to talk about safeguarding. Now, many people will have heard the term safeguarding, and there's lots of sort of legislation, conditions around safeguarding. Safeguarding applies to all places of education where children are either in education or other form, whether it's in a sporting situation, for example. Your child might be part of a cricket or a football team, and safeguarding issues apply to them as much as they apply to schools, as they apply to mosques and madrasas as well. Now, it's a complex area, and not many people know the intricacies of what safeguarding are all about, and also the impact of safeguarding on our institutions, whether they comply with it, whether they understand what it's all about, whether the impact of it in terms of if they fail, what the impact is likely to be. Because I think, and my guest, who will elaborate hopefully very soon, it could have quite damaging implications, not just on the institution, but the individuals as well who are responsible for it. So I'm really pleased to invite and welcome my guest, Samshuddin Ahmad. He is no stranger. He has been on the program over the last few weeks because he's also a very active member of Friends of Al-Aqsa. And as you know, since the Palestine crisis, I've invited him a couple of times to talk about issues relating to Gaza and Palestine, and he has been very instrumental in giving us an up-to-date information about what has been going on over there. So today, I've asked him specifically to come in his professional capacity, which is a safeguarding consultant. So he goes around the country giving information to people. Those are the front line of the services, as well as institutional organizations, telling them what their responsibilities are and what they need to do to make sure that they are compliant with this legislation. As I say, the impact of this legislation is huge. It applies to all sorts of organizations where children are involved. And I know some of our madrasas have fallen short when it comes to safeguarding issues because maybe they're not fully aware and cognizance of some of the issues that impact upon them. All institutions, regardless of what size they are, if they're dealing with children, then they have to have safeguarding leads as well, who are specifically responsible for the welfare and the well-being of those children. So can I say this is a very important subject. Parents may not know what the impact of this legislation is and how it is primarily to protect your children in whatever environment they may be in, whether it be schools, in sporting clubs, whether it be mosques and madrasas. So this is primarily to support and make sure that the welfare and the well-being of children is protected. That's my interpretation. I'm sure Samshuddin will correct me if I'm wrong. But as I say, this is an important issue, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well. If you are a mosque and a madrasa, this impacts on you. How do you respond to this requirement that the government has imposed on people? Love to share what you've done, what sort of measures you have taken in order to comply with this legislation. So we'd love to hear from you. The number is going to be on the screen. It's 01274 214 299. If you feel like contributing, please feel free to call in. But let me say, Assalamu alaikum, Brother Samshuddin. Nice to see you again. You're becoming a regular member of our team here now. But today you come with a different hat on. So you are the safeguarding consultant. You go around the country talking to institutions and individuals. Can you, for our viewers, first of all, just very succinctly put down the markers, what is safeguarding all about?
Right, okay. I think you've done a fantastic job in your intro. You've actually made me redundant.
No, I doubt it.
the overall summary and the whole notion of safeguarding. And as you said in the intro, and I'm going to elaborate on that, if you have any dealings with children, in terms of, and I tend to do with the children's side of safeguarding as opposed to there is the adult side as well, but
Right.
I don't deal with the adult side. Equally complex. So the general theme is very simple. If you have any dealings with children, whether it's in to do with recreational aspects or educational aspects, you are legally bound, and there are legal responsibilities and obligations on you to ensure the safety and well-being and welfare of the children
Right.
in your care are actually
When you say the
maintained.
safety, well-being, and welfare of the children, what does it actually really mean
Right, okay.
on a day-to-day basis?
Right, okay. The answer to that question is this whole notion is actually covered by over 100 different laws and regulations that actually cover, which is why it's actually quite a complex area of work. That's why there are people who have specialist knowledge that actually try to complement the existing work of institutions so that we're actually compliant. Right. And it is actually fair to say that it doesn't matter whether you're a faith institution or non-faith institution, whether you're a statutory provision or a voluntary provision, the responsibility is exactly the same. Right. So long as you have children in your care, again to do with recreation or education, you have that responsibility. Right. And that responsibility is laid up on you as an institution by, as I said, over 100 different laws and regulations that stipulate that, and there is no getting around it. There are certain aspects in our life where there is no getting away from it. Let me give you, the most basic example. Most of us drive. It is quite simply non-negotiable that you have to have insurance, road tax, MOT, and all this kind of thing. Equally, in the world of safeguarding, you've got to have systems, procedures, policies, appropriately trained staff and senior personnel who will actually engage themselves in should anything happen. There are two primary reasons behind safeguarding work. One is to, and this is my own theory, by the way, I've not read it anywhere. One is to hopefully prevent anything happening in the first place. God forbid if we miss that opportunity, then is to apply ourselves in such a way that we're able to intervene at the earliest opportunity. So
now,
that
safeguarding does not just mean the welfare and well-being of the children in the institution. It also means if a person comes across a child or a young adult who is being abused outside the institution, then they have a responsibility to report that, I presume, as well.
As a member of public, we are largely governed by sort of moral values and responsibilities when we see something that we bring into the attention of authorities. So it'll be people like the police, the social services, the children's services. But if you're connected with an organization, that responsibility increases. So it may be that you're actually connected with organization X, but you also have a life as a member of public and you actually see something going on. It would be reasonable to assume that you actually have a greater awareness in respect of safeguarding as opposed to the average Joe Blogg on the street who actually doesn't work in children-oriented environments. So it's that kind of an area. But so long as you're connected with an organization, that's a legal responsibility, A, on the institution to ensure that all the system, procedures, training and knowledge is in place, A, B, that it's up to date, regularly reviewed, but also as individuals connected with organization X, I also have individual responsibility to ensure that I have undertaken relevant training, updates, blah, 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 to ensure that I am compliant, so that I'm also able to discharge my responsibility as personnel of that particular institution.
So, I mean, I know a lot of parents will know, for example, that some of the big all schools will have a safeguarding officer who is responsible for implementing the safeguarding policy within the school. Now, if they see something untoward in a child that happened outside school, either whether in the family environment or outside the family environment, Are they legally bound or morally bound to bring that to the attention, as you say, of the appropriate authorities?
That's a brilliant question. Remember, there is a notion in safeguarding, and it's called safeguarding is everybody's business.
Right.
And that, I think, is really brilliantly sums up where every one of us stand in relation to a child.
Right.
So you have the home, you have the education, you have the health, you have the recreation, you've got the home working club, you've got, I don't know, weekend, some kind of physical activity.
Yeah.
Everybody has that responsibility because the child is that central concern.
The reason why I asked for that clarification is a lot of parents will think maybe that the safeguarding is exclusively within schools or madrasas, etc. But it isn't, is it? So like you say, it's everybody's responsibility.
It is everybody's responsibility, and really good dimension in terms of parental responsibility. For example, we are all aware of the famous case. It's not the kind of thing that you want famous on the news media and whatnot, but there it was, the case of baby Hamza in Bradford not so long ago. Very prominently featured in the media. There were issues there where it showed failures on everybody, including the parents. Now, there may well be other issues within the family setup, which is then the role of other professional bodies that get involved, social services and other entities that become. Which is why we're actually blessed to be in an environment where different specialisms actually come in, but with one overriding objective, and that is to promote and protect the welfare of the child in question.
So what are the key principles around safeguarding that you talk about to people who are responsible for overseeing this area?
Right, okay. You said earlier on, every organization has their own particular area of safeguarding officer, child protection officer, whatever it is. So let's take, for example, a school setup. They will have their, generally all the staff will have the general safeguarding training, but then there will be another level where you will have people who are responsible for dealing with safeguarding matters within that organization. So members of staff that may come across any particular situation, they then go to those people. They're known by so many different names, child protection officer, named person, designated safeguarding lead, it comes in. But ultimately their job is to ensure that they actually coordinate anything that comes from teaching members of staff or other, in the case of recreational places where youth leaders may actually bring something to their attention. As an organization, you have to have the structures in place so that me as a class teacher, I should have the relevant knowledge, skill and training to be able to deal with it there and then at that point in time, in order to then escalate it, if necessary, to the person responsible within my organization. My organization has a responsibility to ensure that not only I'm trained adequately, appropriately and updated, that the person who's at the next level dealing with this in terms of coordinating, they're also well briefed and well trained. You have organizations where you have committees and governing bodies and more. Within that structure, you have to have people who are responsible.
So if there's a body of governors, for example.
You have to have a
school body of governors. I mean, we don't have a governing body in a madrasa, do we? Setting.
Well, theoretically, we do. We just don't seem to call it. There is a group of people who take responsibility, who make decisions. Well, that's what the governing body does. It makes decisions on.
We have a group of trustees who run the mosque and the madrasas.
Exactly.
And so the trustees who run the mosque and the madrasas will have legal responsibility for safeguarding issues.
Quite.
Okay. I mean, what sort of issues fall in the ambit of safeguarding? What are the signs that people might be looking for? What are the the issues that they be looking at? Obviously there's physical abuse, mental abuse, neglect, things like that. What are the key issues that somebody could look at and say, we think there's a safeguarding issue here?
Okay. One of the things about safeguarding, Iqbal Bhai, is that it's a very sensitive subject.
That's why I asked. Because parents will want to know what is it.
Not discussing it is one huge disservice to ourselves and our children, because the thing that we need to recognize is that what we class as children today are the future adults, and they are our future for tomorrow. So unless we have a framework where we're actually saving them and protecting them from potential harm, we are as guilty. So coming back to your question in terms of the law recognizes at this point in time, things change periodically. There are 4 main categories of abuse that we deal with. You've got the physical abuse, you've got the emotional abuse, you've got neglect, and you've got sexual abuse.
Right.
Within each one of those, you could do half a dozen of PhDs within each one of those. What it is, why it is, what can we do to prevent it, and what do we do to remedy people who have been affected by those things. So those are the 4 key areas. In each one of them, so let's take neglect for example. Abuse of neglect. Well, what sort of signs are we looking for? It could be as long as the length of my arm, because again, now you're getting into an area where if an organization has invested relevant, appropriate time, resources, energy in terms of educating its staff, they will pick up those signs. So let me give you an example. Neglect. Okay, I had an instance where a particular member of staff actually saw. What this particular teacher did was every other day in the class they would have a task, and on completion of that task everybody would be given some sweets, biscuits and whatever. But there were 2 particular children that just happened to be siblings. It was the one thing that they were actually waiting for, and this particular member of staff actually picked it up.
Right.
Cutting the long story short, because of their particular safeguarding training background and everything, because they had been well trained, it actually transpired that this particular siblings came from a household where they had very little provision in terms of looking after the children, whether it was to do with clothing, food, sweets, snacks and whatnot. So the little bit of snack that they got in this particular class was the one thing that they were looking forward to. Now that, generally speaking, it comes under one of the 4 categories. Neglect. You're also looking at potential emotional abuse. Well, what about physical and sexual abuse? You don't know what else is brewing. So these are the kind of things that we need to be mindful. There are other specialists who will deal with these things. So for example, as a teacher, if you pick up something that doesn't seem right, you should have been trained by your organization in terms of how you approach that situation, because you've got to have that one-to-one interaction with that child. You've got to extract that information. It's not an easy task. You've got to know how to interact.
So I mean, obviously, these are important issues, and I remember I grew up in a generation where, if you went to school or madrasa and you went home, and so either the teacher gave you a cane, or the teacher or the ustad gave you a cane, you would dare not go home and tell your parents, because you'd probably get a double caning and another slap as well. When that generation, thank God, is no longer the case. So a parent needs to be aware that there are issues around how you interact with your own child and how you sort of physically and emotionally help them nurture and grow them. So these signs, are they particularly common in certain areas, in certain sort of social stratas, so certain communities, or they affect all communities equally as badly as everybody else?
In terms of, that's a really good question again, but taking away the religious aspect, the racial aspect and everything else, let's look at the socio-economic aspect of it. There is a sort of common theme. So it goes something like, if you come from households that have financial difficulties, that have other social communal challenges.
Social deprivation, for example.
Yeah. Clearly, in terms of the level of awareness to deal with things, the level of desire to want to put things right when things are not, sort of looking right, the desire to want to challenge things when they're not right, that threshold is so much slower than a family that comes from an affluent background where mom and dad are well educated, siblings are going through their GCSEs and A levels and blah. It's a very different dynamic. So there is that general awareness that people raise will have had, that have been risen as a result of that experience.
And just turning that around slightly, do you, in your professional work, obviously you come across all sorts of cases and all sorts of professionals. Do you see any sort of subtleties around cultural issues? You know, because obviously our culture is very different. You know, our culture in terms of your respect for your parents and your elders is very different to other cultures as well. And equally, the parental expectation of their child in terms to behave in a certain norm is also very different.
Yeah.
So do you see that coming through as well?
Some years ago, I actually worked in local authorities. It's called the social care legal team, but it's actually the child protection legal team where I worked. And after working in that department, I actually thought I would never have anything to do with safeguarding work. Not because I couldn't do it, but because of what I had experienced in the time that I was there. And just to give you an example, that on a Friday afternoon when, you know, if you're in sort of office kind of work, after 3:30 you're psychologically gearing yourself up, the week is over, you're not going to go. Yeah. Then all of a sudden a file lands on your desk and you have, in the professional terminology, you have a disclosure. In other words, a child has, you know, reported an issue. And that was actually something that was actually reported by a child at the age of 15, going to their school teacher, actually making the disclosure, raising the issue that they're actually being sexually abused.
Right.
Now, there were, cutting the long story short, there were issues around, well, you know what, this family is known in a particular way within the community. The alleged perpetrator, because it's an allegation, so you've got to bear that in mind. The allegation is against the the cousin of one of the most prominent member of the, you know, XYZ institutions, or it's their, you know, extended family members. So there is always those cultural issues that come into effect, come into play in terms of.
Just, I mean, obviously, you know, unfortunately, I have come across similar cases where that has happened or has been alleged in the first instance. Now, the response of the authorities automatically, what is the automatic response of an authority when a child comes to you and says, I'm being sexually abused or I'm being, you know, beaten up, etc.? Because some parents, you know, sometimes obviously social services will intervene and take the child away for their own safeguarding, welfare. So, I mean, is that correct that, you know, the authorities will have the power to do that, to protect that child from further abuse?
Yeah. Like I said, there are two guiding principles, but that's through my own experience. A, we prevent harm coming to children in the first place, ideally, but sometimes it's not possible, and those unfortunate cases go as far as hitting the national media several days in a row, if not weeks in a row. Baby P case, everybody remembers how you know, miserably that child was failed because.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Baby P. Initially known was Baby P,
yes,
but
yes,
then the court decided to release the full name. It was Baby Peter, and that poor child had been missed by authorities over 50 times. So what do you mean by authorities? You're talking about social services, police, GP practice, health visitors. All sorts of entities that actually came into should have had something to do with protecting.
They should have spotted it very early, and they should have stopped it immediately. Yeah.
In the case of, I've just digressed for a moment, but just to illustrate the point, in the case of baby Hamza Khan, that was actually a Bradford case. That child was actually found to have been dead, left in his cot in his room for 3 years before. It was actually
nobody missed him,
and nobody picked up on it. Yeah, sure, there would have been visits there and more. So, at the back of all this training, development, policy, procedure is one thing. Can you stop it from happening in the first place? That will be the that will be the desire on the part of everybody. Or, in the alternative, can we actually step in good time to ensure whatever's happened, we can put a stop to it then and then, and try and hopefully work to reverse the damaging effect of that, because there's always damaging effect when a child is abused in whatever the 4 categories that I mentioned earlier. Coming back to cultural issues, in some communities there are massive cultural issues. You know, I get phone calls regularly because of the fact that I actually, I don't actually just go and tell people, I actually train people in different levels. You know, you've got the general staffing training, you've got training for people who are responsible for managing the potential allegations within their organizations. How does the governing body actually work? In actually undertaking safeguarding audit, you know, is everything okay here?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And obviously, one of the issues that I'm also aware of is where nefarious allegations are made at times as well, because of other factors that may be at play here. I mean, just to stay on that line and theme at the moment, I mean, this is a huge responsibility for institutional organizations. Now, we have a lot of sporting clubs, you know, cricket, football, you name it. We have mosques and madrasas. I mean, we have, you know, in Bradford, for example, mashallah, there's so many mosques and so many madrasas, some small, some large. The law applies to all of them equally, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Right? Whether they're institutionally or so let's put it this way, they're formally established or whether they're informal sort of madrasas. So the law applies to them equally, doesn't it?
Without a doubt, like I said right at the beginning, if you've got anything to do with children, either under the heading of recreational activities or educational activities, and in a lot of cases, our educational stuff tend to be supplementary,
Right.
but the law applies exactly the same.
Okay.
If you've got responsibility for children, you have to have those systems, policies and procedures in place. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble. There's no other way of putting it.
And do you think that there is sufficient awareness and knowledge within those institutions about the implications of what this requirement is all about? Do you think that they are in a position to understand the legal position that they put themselves in by, you know, having the facility in their premises, in their area?
The fact that I'm around, and I have been around for some years, and inshallah I hope to be around for many more years to come, is a sign that maybe, and there are many more like me, you know, certainly by no means, you know, that I'm the only one around. And the fact that there are those of us around doing this thing up and down the country means that there is a need for this. The awareness isn't there where it should be. The flip side of that is, I didn't know. Not knowing about it is not a defense whatsoever. It will actually make matters worse. So you have to, as an organization, as an institution, irrespective of your size, you have to make sure you've got your place sorted out when it comes to the requirements of safeguarding. The education itself is a different entity altogether, but it still comes within the same spectrum.
As I said, you know, at the top of the program, obviously, safeguarding is one of the key fundamental issues in protecting children, but also there are adults as well who are also equally come under the safeguarding category as well, vulnerable adults, as you know, as we would term them. But I mean, in terms of, you know, I don't know if any of our viewers have had any experience of these issues. If you have and you'd like to share them with us, then I'd love to hear what you have to say, and whether you feel that the regulations are over the top, whether they are unnecessary, whether, you know, they need to be sort of reviewed and curtailed, or whether they need to be strengthened. So these are some of the issues that, you know, we may want to talk about. So if you want to ring in, please do so. The phone number is 01274 214 299. As I say, we're appearing on the screen as well. But I'll repeat it: 01274 214 299. I mean, these are really important issues. And I think, as Samshuddin said earlier on, that, you know, not recognizing them and not accepting these responsibilities is a very neglectful act to do on the part of the institutions and the individuals who run those institutions. They probably seriously don't realize how serious the impact of this could be. And we know we've had cases in the past where in madrasas, you know, some imams unfortunately have taken the cane to a child, and they've been then reported, and the mosque committees will say, oh no, this is something that, you know, is natural and normal, because that's what used to happen back home. I mean, I know I was the subject of that as well. But I'm not saying that was good for me, but obviously, it is not something that children deserve and children need at the moment. There are many other different ways of sort of imparting education and knowledge to those children. So, I mean, in terms of sticking to our institutions in particular, obviously there are lots of madrasas and mosques and etc. who have madrasas attached to them, children coming in. Do you feel that that level of knowledge and understanding exists in our community, or is there a huge shortfall that needs to be sort of overcome?
I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And I can only go by my own experience of what I have seen. So it's not a generalized statement. I wouldn't do that because it
have
would
you
be
got
unfair.
examples of where a case, or not necessarily naming names, etc., where something has happened in a madrasa, and because they've not taken the appropriate measures that they've found to be wanting, and they've been either prosecuted or been given warnings?
I dealt with an organization down south who'd had a child from their supplementary settings. It was a maktab that they were running,
Right.
that actually went to the school and reported something that had gone on at home.
Right.
And it was actually quite serious. And when that resulted in investigation, remember what I said earlier on, there's the child and you've got different entities, all of whom have a connection with that child. And that connection then gives you a legal responsibility because it's a child that you're dealing with. And as was the case with this particular institution, and there was this issue, this kind of thinking that we're not a statutory setup, so therefore should we be subject to in a same level of scrutiny and blah, blah, blah. And I actually found that quite disheartening because, yeah, that's exactly what happens.
So the institution did not acknowledge that they had an equal right or responsibility for the welfare of that child. So basically they sort of absolve themselves from that responsibility to say, we are aware of it, but we're not going to do anything about it.
It was almost as though, oh, it's happened somewhere else.
Yeah.
We're not involved with it, so therefore we're okay. And there was a massive missing link here. And the linkage is you actually have a relationship with that child. And that, as I said, brings responsibility. But when something happens, everybody that has a responsibility with that child is actually going to get pulled up.
So did the authorities pull up that institution for failing to acknowledge?
They actually, shall we say, didn't have a very pleasant time.
Right.
Hence my involvement, because I was asked to help the organization. And insofar as this particular institution was concerned, it was simply around, you've got to have the policies in place, you've got to have the procedures in place, you've got to have your people appropriately trained, you've got to have a system in place that, it can pick up potential signs. Remember we talked about the 4 key areas. Within each one of them, you could have 50 different signs that you could potentially pick up. And I gave you an example earlier on. Let's pick up on neglect again one more time. For example, if a child has hurt themselves, failure to seek medical attention within a reasonable time period. Now, you can ask me, what is a reasonable time period? Because that I think is, how long is a piece of string?
The word reasonable is used here.
Exactly, within the context of a particular situation. Yeah. If you have not sought medical attention for that child within a reasonable period of time, you are asking for trouble. Yeah. To the extent where, in one of my cases, that child actually got taken away.
I hope my viewers who are watching this, are taking all this in, because obviously this is a serious issue that is affecting many, many families out there. We're going for a short break. I hope you found the discussion so far of some interest and some value, and I hope it's opening up your minds as well to this issue. Don't go away. Inshallah, we'll be coming back when I'll be asking more questions about what we need to do. I'll see you soon. In the meantime, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.